Now, I flew back to Thailand right at the beginning of 1991, and the first thing I did was head down to Koh Samui. Now, while I was on Samui, the Gulf War broke out. You know, the American troops had been building up, but the actual war broke out while I was there, and it was quite surreal. You know, I used to listen to it every day on the BBC World Service. You know, that used to kind of on the long wave that used to drift in and out, and I'd get the daily bulletins on that, but it was a bit surreal, kind of with this war going on while you're on this tropical paradise. One memory I've got from that is I remember we went into Naton, the main town on Koh Samui, and we were in a restaurant. They had the TV on, and it was the first time I'd seen any of that smart bomb footage. You know, they had the cameras in the bombs, and of course the footage was silent, but what I remember was that the Thai commentator was adding sound effects to it. I mean, it's not funny really, but you know, you see this smart bomb zeroing on its target, and when it hit, the Thai commentator would go boom, boom, like that. So yeah, you know, all in all, kind of like a very surreal experience. So once again, we stayed on Tongyang Beach, which was as nice as ever. But Sunflower Bungalows, which you'll probably remember, is the place that I stayed for the first few years I was coming to Thailand, was now closed. So we stayed at a place just about 100 yards further down the beach, a place called Infu Palace. And this is just a nice picture of the beach. I mean, look how beautiful that was. Towards the end of the Gulf War, I returned back to Patpong to start work again as a tour guide at Khao Yai National Park. And I remember listening to the BBC World Service for the bulletin on the Gulf War one day, and they just mentioned at the end that there'd been a military coup in Thailand, which wasn't particularly a rare thing. But we hadn't heard anything about it, so I went next door to tell the neighbours, and I said, look, I've just been listening to the BBC, and there's been a Batiwad, you know, there's been a coup. And just instantly, without even thinking about it, this guy said to me, Thai guy said to me, don't worry, he said, tonight there'll only be Channel 9 on TV. And then he said, and tomorrow everything will be exactly the same as yesterday. And that is exactly how it went. My great friend Mike, you know, he used to get a bit carried away. He was a bit imaginative. And I remember one day he came to me and he told me that he met this fantastic girl, and I thought, oh great, Mike, you know, what does she do? And he told me that she was a fashion designer, and I thought, well, that's different, way to go, Mike, you know. So anyway, you know, he was talking about this girl he'd met for about a week, and eventually he said, do you want to meet her? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? So I thought, where's it going to take me to meet a fashion designer? You know, I thought I was going to go to some big offices somewhere, but no, he took me to a Patpong go-go bar. I guess she was doing a bit of part-time work in the go-go bar. But anyway, like, this is Mike with the fashion designer, and this is a picture I took in one of the Patpong go-go bars. Just interesting. Just look at the hairstyle of the girl on the bottom of the right. You know, I don't know, it looks like something from the 60s. We met this Thai guy, used to be a school teacher, called Dewey, and he said, look, you know, he said, I used to teach English to a lot of the hill tribes, and he said, and they're building some dirt roads that are going into this Samung, Amper Samung, up near Chiang Mai. And he said, you know, do you want to go on a bike trip? You know, we can get some dirt bikes and we can go for a week, disappear into the jungle, riding down these dirt trails. So that's exactly what we did, and you know, it was great. It was fantastic, you know. And this is a group picture of us on our dirt bikes, and we'd sort of ride all day, and we'd turn up in some obscure village late at night. And I just remember we turned up at this first village, and we were just like, because we've been dirt track riding, our faces were just covered in dust. So we'd arrived and we were in need of a shower, and they said, oh yeah, you know, we would just wash in the river. You know, we were in the middle of the jungle, so I remember we walked down to this river, and we just sort of like, you know, we didn't know the way it worked, so we just stripped off. And we were cleaning ourselves in the river, and then sort of like we heard some giggling, and we looked up, and there was some girls looking out the windows of one of these huts in the village, you know. I think it was the last thing on the planet they expected to see, some sort of like naked foreigners having a shower in the stream. And as you can see from this picture, you know, it was just, they were just cutting the road for the first time. It was just like miles and miles of jungle, you know. I remember just sort of like having to get the bikes across wooden bridges, you know. It was a real adventure, but great fun, you know, we had a real laugh. And wherever we turned up in these villages, you know, it wasn't an organised tour, they just weren't expecting us. So, you know, we'd get a crowd around us, you know, whenever we turned up in the village. You know, we had some really good welcomes, you know, there's some cool people. And while we were in one of these hill tribe villages, we met this lady who just had this incredible long hair. I mean, no idea how long she'd been growing it, but it was incredible. And this is just a picture of some of the hill tribe children. I think what I like about this set of pictures is that 100% authentic, you know, in the sense that these people weren't expecting us to arrive, you know, they weren't putting on a show just for us, you know, like these days you can go on these treks and they'll all be wearing those outfits, but it's because they know you're coming, you know. And we kind of got the bug, you know, after this. So when we got back to Chiang Mai, we hired some more motorcycles and we headed up into Chiang Rai province, which in those days, you know, parts of it were really remote. And that was the first time I went to one of my favourite towns in Thailand, Doi Mae Salong, which is right up north on the Burmese border. Just absolutely incredible riding up those places. And in those days, you know, there's a lot of history with, you know, a guy called Kun Sa, who was, you know, he was the leader of the Shan state, which was kind of like a people that were living mainly in Burma, but who saw themselves as kind of like indigenous to the area and not restricted by international borders. You know, it was quite an interesting story. It was just some beautiful bike riding, you know, just really adventurous stuff, fantastic. I remember on this trip, my friends Jeremy and Harley had taken ladies up to Chiang Mai with me. I'd met girls and we're taking around travelling. I was travelling on my own, you know, and just one day we were on this trip, we were in Chiang Rai city centre, and all of a sudden, you know, like Harley's girlfriend cried out. She recognised one of her friends, you know, just by bizarre coincidence. She saw a friend of hers who used to live in Chiang Rai called Jumbo, you know. She was a tall girl, but she was lovely. She was like a really attractive girl, and yeah, you know, it kind of worked out nicely because I ended up hooking up with Jumbo, who sort of travelled around with us for a while from then on. It was a lot different back in those days, you know. If you went to northeast Thailand or North Thailand, I can remember on this trip, I can remember stopping somewhere on the motorcycle to ask directions, and I just sort of walked up this little drive, and I remember a woman seeing me and just looking terrified and running away, you know. We went to the elephant show in Mae Rim, you know, where they show off the trained elephants, you know, the elephants that in previous generations they used to use for logging. And this was a picture of Jumbo. I think that was taken at the elephant show. Again, this is another picture that was taken at the elephant show. I just remember a Thai guy, you know, I could speak Thai a bit at that time, and I remember a Thai guy just sort of leaning over to me and tapping me on the shoulder, and he just said, he looked at her and he looked at me, he said, I want to die and be born again as a Farang, as a Westerner. Now, in those days, every 3 months we used to have to go down to Malaysia on a visa run, and we used to get the Butterworth Express, which, you know, I think the train used to leave about 3 p.m. from Hua Lamphong station. It would take 20 hours overnight to get to Butterworth in Penang, you know, Malaysia. And then when we were there, we'd stay at the Old China Hotel, and this little Indian guy used to come along, and he used to collect all your passports. He had all the forms with him, and he'd help you fill the forms in. and you'd give him the money for the visa and a bit extra, and he'd run off with it and deal with it all for you and bring them back to you the next day. And it was really cool. We used to look forward to the visa runs because in those days they still had only 2 beers generally available in Thailand, and when we went at the night in Penang, you know, we had like other beers like Tiger, Anchor, Tuborg, you know, so it just made a change, you know. So we'd spend one night in Penang, and then the next day we'd get on the train again, you know, for the 20-hour journey back. And it was, you know, they were quite eventful, them journeys, because everybody would meet up in the restaurant carriages, which in those days used to sell alcohol. So, you know, it would open about 5 or 6 in the afternoon, the restaurant carriage. We'd all go there, all the expats who were on the visa runs would go there and get drunk. And I just remember like all kinds of incidents happening when everybody was drunk. And then later on we'd go back to our sleepers and sleep it off. Now I remember that when you were on the way down to Penang, you know, you used to cross into Malaysia, and they used to have the signs up of a noose saying death penalty for drug smugglers. So as you went across the border, you know, I think the security guards used to kind of play it up a bit, and they used to walk through the trains, and they used to, I think they used to see if you were nervous, they'd point up the sign with the noose and do a signal noose around the neck and point at you, you know, you look at this. And you know, it could be, it sort of, you know, it made you feel a bit strange because they'd make you leave your bags on the train while you were kind of like exiting Thailand, and then you go to another bit of the platform and enter Malaysia. Sorry, while you were doing that, you know, anybody could have been messing around with your baggage, you know, and you get back on the train, and then they come on the train and search your bags. But you know, it was you know, that was just one facet of it. There was no problems, but it was yeah, it wasn't exactly welcoming. Right, and this is 2 of my good friends, Steve and Jeff, on one of these visa runs to Penang. You know, we were just sitting on one of the samlaws there that were a bit different to the ones in Thailand, because the ones in Penang, you used to sit in front of them, you know, whereas in Thailand you sit behind. I used to find the ones where you sit in the front a bit more kind of relaxing, you know, you had a better view. Now on one of these visa runs, myself and Steve decided that we'd take a short flight over from Penang to Medan in Sumatra, you know, and we travelled up to a town called Brastagi up in the hills, and we explored further from that right up to Lake Toba. And I was a bit worried at the beginning of the trip, you know, because I remember thinking, shit, you know, I didn't really have enough money for it. But as it turned out, everything there was so cheap. It was unbelievable, you know. It was almost like we couldn't spend our money, you know. So in the end, we had more than enough for the few days we were there. And this is a picture taken from Brastagi town centre, you know, which is at the foot of a volcano. And I remember that one day we hiked up the side of a volcano, which I think to this day it's the only time I've ever done that. You know, I just remember you get the kind of the sulphurous smell as you were going up. But yeah, that is the only time I think I've ever hiked up a volcano. And this was just some crazy guy that we saw in the market in central Brastagi. And one night in Brastagi in the market, they just had this incredible fire, you know. Some of the wooden buildings caught fire, you know. It took them ages to put it out, you know. There was a lot of damage done that night. Now, for a short period in the early 90s, you know, smuggling goods from Malaysia to Thailand was quite prolific, and it was pretty much in the open. It was silly little things like chocolate, you know, which wasn't very good quality in Thailand at that time. And you used to get on the train coming back from your visa run, you know, you get on the train at Butterworth going back into Thailand, and all the train staff would walk along, and they'd open up the sleeping beds, you know, that folded down from the ceiling. They'd open them up and they'd fill the whole area with chocolate and then close it. I mean, it was just, there was no attempt to hide it, you know. So it was just, and then of course when they got to some point, they'd just take it all out again. It was blatant. And not only that, once you reached the border crossing going back into Thailand at Padang Bazaar, as soon as it left the station, it was still slow. You'd get all these people all these smugglers would jump onto the side of the train. And this is a picture I got of them, you know, hanging onto the side of the train. And when they got into the area that was in the Thai customs jurisdiction, you'd see all these Thai officials running down the railway embankments, chasing after them, and they jump off and run. And this, you know, I can remember it happening on at least 2 or 3 visa runs I did. And this is me the first time I went back to Tong's village in Suphanburi and met a family. And this is 2 of the children in Tong's village in Suphanburi. Now at some point we returned back to Koh Samui and we met these 3 American guys. It was Huey, Jeff and Harley. And Harley and myself were good friends for years and years afterwards. Now one day on Koh Samui, Jeff met this girl called Lee. Now we didn't realise it at the time, but Lee lived in Patpong, which was the town where we were running the tour guide business from, you know, taking people to Khao Yai. And one day in Patpong we just bumped into Lee, you know, which was kind of like a bizarre. And this is Harley. I think we probably hiked back up to the Samui Highlands viewpoint. And this is Mike at the Infu Palace bungalows doing what Mike does best. Mike loved to drink. And this is a nice shot that shows a bit of the reef on Tong Yang Beach, you know, when the tide is out. Now this was taken on a visit to Nam Muang waterfalls, and it's the first picture of myself and a lady I met called Tong, who I was to spend a lot of time with. And here's a nice picture of one of the beautiful sunsets we used to get on Tong Yang Beach. Here's another picture. I think it was taken somewhere on the south coast of Samui. Now, I mean, Samui is a beautiful place no matter what way you look at it, but you know, it's you know, there's no way it's ever going to be what it was 30 years ago again.